Hey guys, so we just did a podcast just with Sonya and I. We want to talk about the seasons and all the change that happens as we move into fall. Our boys are 4 weeks into school. What kind of like little mini obstacles do we face along the way? And we shared a little bit about our not meeting of expectation or not feeling validated for things, little tasks that we do. So stay tuned as Sonya schools me on needing validation.
Yeah, it's all about connection and reconnecting to yourself and adjusting and pivoting to seasons in our world, seasons within ourselves, seasons in a relationship. And yes, and you will hear me validate Nick's performance with shelving in our home.
Yeah.
Good job.
It's what to do with that, all that extra mojo and energy that we cultivate in our human bodies.
Yeah, so stay tuned. It's a fun conversation, and please let us know what you think.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Health Ignited, and we are officially into our 4th week of school with our boys for the year. We just came off of a summer in transitioning to school, and it's been a little challenging.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, lots of different transitions for us as parents and also for our kids. So trying to navigate their feelings, our feelings, the world's feelings, sometimes can feel a little bit interesting and challenging.
Yeah, there's a season to everything, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And if you've been following us for a period of time, you would know that we talk a lot about variation and adapting to the variation, but essentially that, variation is part of life, and seasonal variation is part of that, and how we eat and how we dress, of course, the things that we do, the activities that we do. There's so much variation that happens. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the season of life and relationship, the seasons of your dietary intake, and some of the things that maybe you could be doing to optimize your lifestyle habits as a result of the seasons, and maybe some more stuff on top of that.
Yeah, and I think why this conversation is so important is that often we hit a wall when we're trying to navigate our lives and think that everything should go as planned, as we've been doing it for every day. And then all of a sudden there's a change that happens that maybe we're fighting against, whether it's changing in our schedule or our body's needs change when it comes to different foods that the body needs in different seasons. And yet we're used to our routine, and it's sometimes hard to pivot. And also in relationships, sometimes there's expectation that things should feel the same all the time. And then we can kind of go down this rabbit hole of feeling maybe not enough or disappointed, or all the various emotions that come up when we feel like we're just not meeting those expectations.
Yeah, so let's go into that a little bit. Where do you want to start?
So let's start with just transitioning into the fall, right? So when seasons are transitioning, so are our bodies, from our microbiome to the requirements that the body has with food and sleep and all the different things. And throughout the summer, we get used to a certain routine. And as the weather shifts, as the time that the sun goes up and down shifts, we also have to change accordingly so that we match that rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you kind of said this at the beginning, but we are such creatures of habit, and so we get used to that time clock and the longer days in the summer, and that usually means we're going to bed a little bit later, and those habits just tend to continue, right? And what we're suggesting here is that we are absolutely tied to our environment, and so wherever possible, we want to make sure we're adapting as well, and not just getting stuck in a rut of a rhythm. And so that could look like something different for everybody, but our wake up times typically are the same, though, wouldn't you say?
They are. And I think that is a result of our culture, social things that we need to accommodate, school schedules we need to accommodate. But if we really were moving with the rhythm of the season, I think that too would change. And we've taught courses on Ayurvedic medicine, our yoga fasting program, and we actually teach that depending on our constitution, some may need to sleep in a little bit more when it comes to fall and winter, whereas others will thrive in waking up even earlier, like at 5 a.m. So I think it kind of goes back to that self-inquiry of if there is flexibility in your day to understand when the most optimal time is for you in that season. I think that's the thing that will change our relationship to the changes that are happening.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, if we were all to sit back and think what would be the perfect life that we could create for ourselves, I think it really would be one that was more harmonious with the natural rhythms of what's happening in our environment. But with the typical constraints of modern life and work and to-do lists and obligations, it's not always easy to match that ideal dream life into reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, part of me wants to go like, well, why don't we just create that dream life, and so that we can just get up when we want to. And the other part of me goes, well, our kids are in school.
Yeah.
And, we open our business at a specific time, during the weekdays and whatnot. So like, what do we do with that information?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's where some of the lifestyle hacking kind of comes into play, and we control what we can control. So one of the things that we can control is our food and how we navigate the change with food. So you might just discover within yourself that as soon as the fall shows up, you're craving soups and you're craving maybe more of those root vegetables. And you want to start listening to that, because often maybe we're stuck in a certain way of eating. Maybe we're eating more raw. And when we're in that mindset of eating a certain way all the time, it can be really hard to shift out of it. So understanding that there's a reason behind it, because now that we're moving into colder months, our enzymes are changing, the microbiome's changing, the body's working a little bit harder to digest food. So if the way to optimize that is to eat food that's already pre-digested, so that's soups and stews and things that are going to be really easy for the body to transform in your digestion.
Yeah, so you mentioned like the microbiome changes, and I think it's important to maybe discuss that a little bit. I mean, we don't have our research papers out in front of us, but these are things that we definitely take a look at very, very regularly. But it is interesting that you get a different makeup of microbes depending on the temperature, depending on the amount of time that you're spending outside. And then, I mean, along with that, obviously, is also say you're going to do more gardening. You're going to actually be in the soil maybe a little bit more in the summer than you would, during the fall season. So there are like exposures, I think, that are more obvious, but the things that are less obvious are that circadian clock, the light, the change in temperature actually has an effect on how we break down our food and the kind of bugs that grow, right? Zach Bush talks a lot about carbon cycling too, right? So as we get closer to fall, we have a bountiful amount of leaves, and there's a lot of photosynthesis going on, a lot of carbon and oxygen exchange. But as we move into the fall winter season, there's a lot less greenery around, which means that carbon levels actually rise.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the typical cold flu season actually correlates with this massive upsurge of carbon, which isn't a bad thing. It's just a reality of our northern hemisphere life, that we're going to go through larger scales of this ebb and flow of carbonation throughout these winter months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, just these intricacies, these changes. But if we actually start to watch nature and start to understand how she's always changing, it gives us insight into our biology as well, because we're always connected. So when we start to understand that relationship, we too then can move with that. So food is the first place to start, if anywhere. So, bringing in those warming meals, warming teas throughout the day, just to kind of signal your body that, hey, I got you. Like, I understand that things are about to change, and I'm going to change my habits to help support you.
Yeah, I love that. And, we know that we can break down carbohydrates more effectively when there's more sun out.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with this entire relationship that we're speaking to. And so now is not the time to crush all the sugar, especially throughout the winter months. Really, like, as we move into the winter months, it's really more about this, ketosis kind of state, this higher fat, moderate protein, lower carbohydrate.
What about Thanksgiving? What about Christmas? What about all the things that show up and all the birthday parties that kids go to during the school year? That there's this
that's life, yeah.
bountiful of opportunities to indulge.
Indulgences and teases are everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about that. Yeah, I don't know what to say. That's a it's a modern that's a reality of being in this.
Well, we do know what to say, because we teach variation with food throughout the month. We teach variation throughout the week. So maybe those days are your feast days.
Yeah.
Right. So
totally.
That way we can take this relationship out of the picture of it being too daunting to serve the body what it needs. So we can bring our lifestyle practices with us, even in those moments where there's, family getting together and these gatherings. And that's the beautiful thing about fall and winter, is that the coziness that happens. And with coziness, even in our house, comes more baking, right? But there's options in how you bake and what you use, ingredients that you use, and also in variation in how we eat.
Yeah, I see where you're going with this now. Yeah, just trying to make it simple and trying to make it doable. Yes. is really the answer.
Yeah, and okay. Nick doesn't do simplicity. That's why he didn't clue in to what I just started there.
Some would argue that I'm mostly simple-minded.
This is true.
Yeah, it's present company included. And on that note, we're going to talk a little about seasons of relationships. Because I think it's important too. It's like, in a relationship, it's easy to get stuck in a rut of, everything's going to be amazing. And then there's ruts where we get into when things are challenging. And I think, you can use the same principle with relationships as you do with your food, and that you find a new rhythm. You're working with a new set of, environmental influences and different challenges. Like Sonya, for example, definitely likes to use her weighted blanket more often. So there's less cuddling typically in the wintertime, despite the fact that you'd think there'd be more cuddling.
Right.
Because it's getting colder.
Well, weighted blanket equals better sleep, equals more energy, equals happy wife throughout the day.
Yeah, no, totally. I'm just using that as an example. But I think the point I was really trying to make is that, I think it's often that we make decisions when we're in a low likability factor with our partner. And, let's say there's a challenge that comes up, and the challenge maybe, something that's triggering one of the individuals. And then we sort of wrap a story around what that meaning is for us in relationship. And I think it's important to understand that there's just an ebb and flow to every relationship. And there's a time for, maybe being a little bit more internal, and where we may see that as the other person being the problem, maybe it's more that we need that internal time to really reflect on what's going on. And then we have a more outward expression where we want more attachment, we want more closeness, what have you. And I think it's just important to recognize that about ourselves and not make decisions about, who that partner is for us or what they mean to us in every moment, and make sort of a generalization when we can actually just be in an experience of, I feel more internal right now. But we can interpret the internalization as wanting to push someone away. And those are interesting dynamics, I think, that show up in relationship.
Yeah, so I think the solution really is to understand your own rhythm first, and then being able to communicate that rhythm, because it's going to be quite the challenge if the two are on different routines, rhythms, and have, again, that expectation that the other one is in the same place. So for example, I talk a lot about women and their rhythm throughout their monthly cycle. So there's this misconception that our libido should be high all the time. And but in reality, our hormones, our estrogen and our testosterone, are going to be higher after menstruating towards ovulation. But as soon as ovulation occurs, that ship has sailed. So those last 2 weeks, it's really challenging for the woman to be in that state, but there's this expectation within her, maybe even from her partner, and life when it's happening around her can feel a lot more challenging, more than it would the first 2 weeks of her cycle. So that is the last thing on her mind. But then often the narrative is, what's wrong with me? So when we can start to understand our rhythm, we can then, and I know we've done another podcast on this where we talked a bit more on that relationship, is then you can communicate with your partner, and then there's an understanding. So then you can come together and create a rhythm for your relationship. And then, there's the weekly cycle, there's the monthly cycle, and then there's like the cycle of life. Like when you're in the season of the beginnings of your relationship, how you respond to one another is going to be very different. And as life happens, as children come into the picture and you're pivoting and shifting always, then that season may change. It may change into a season where you're kind of individual and partnering together and like doing life together. But maybe this is where, you're not going to have the same tingles as you did in the beginnings. And it doesn't mean that they're gone. It just means that your attention has shifted. Just as when summer moves into the fall, it doesn't mean summer is never coming back. It's just our attention has to shift a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Did I say thank you?
I think you were going to.
I think I was going to. I was saying thank you inside, and
Mhm.
I'm actually just acknowledging just, you know, the people listening to a conversation like this, and the hope is that we reflect on it, and, you know, not beat ourselves up about the moment that we're in, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's in a good moment and then we're, you know, nothing can harm us, or, you know, feel like we're indestructible, or we're in a vulnerable place where things feel a little more challenging and a little more rocky. And I think it's important to just recognize that there's just, like, again, to your point, there's a season to everything. And, you know, maybe it's a strategy thing. So let's talk about that second half of a woman's cycle when there's less desire for intimacy. Like, maybe there's different ways to connect with your partner in that time. So what would that look like?
Yeah, I think that would vary for every relationship. Maybe that's making conscious effort to have date nights. Maybe it's a conscious effort to have moments in the evening where you're connecting and talking and dreaming together. So maybe there's just more conscious effort to do things a little bit differently. So the intimacy is coming from a different place instead of a physical place. And maybe that would lead to something physical, because then the woman's oxytocin is being supported, her progesterone is being supported, because now her stress levels are down. Now her nervous system can relax. And that's the only way really to get her in that space of higher libido.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And then what about for men? Like, men, I think we have more of a volatility to our hormonal cycle. You know, we've talked about like sort of the irritable male syndrome, where we can be going up and down our testosterone through the day. We can be sort of in a rut one moment, and, you know, the next moment we can be feeling fantastic. And so there's a little bit more volatility, which is why I think men kind of move into expectation, because since we're feeling good, like, everybody else must be feeling good too. Right. And I think that's, you know, there's an opportunity to use that energy for something creative or something to get something done. Like this, over the weekend, I had in my head that I had to put these shelves in our boys' closet. And it's like, I didn't want to do anything else, or it's not that I didn't want to do anything else, but I just really wanted to get that done. And this feeling of productivity, like, you know, maybe if we're not getting that same intimacy or that same level of libido from our partner, maybe it's just time to put that energy into something creative and constructive. And it could be lots of different things. It could be obviously exercise. It could be, you know, maybe you got a garage, you like to work on cars, maybe that's what you're doing. And for me this weekend, it was putting up a shelf, a couple, and it was fun. I actually really enjoyed it. And of course, I'm looking for a reward afterwards. I'm still waiting to hear how it turned out, as far as like, how did you see?
I looked at it yesterday.
No, I know you looked at it. I don't think I got any sort of response yet, because I showed the boys, and then I just haven't. This is actually the first time we've talked about it.
No, I looked at it in front of you and said it was good.
Okay.
Looks good.
Awesome.
This is a whole other podcast that we have to do on love languages. Now some people,
that's funny, because like the
affirmation.
the first time we talked about it was actually when I was putting the kids to bed last night. So we didn't actually look at it together, to be fair.
Right.
Okay. So anyways, this is life right here. It's an example of like people seeing different stories of something similar, but anyways,
and not meeting expectations.
Yeah, exactly. So here we are sharing, you know, stories of like the season in a relationship, you know, how we move from like joy to happiness to frustration and like misconnection, disconnection, and how to like sort of navigate back through. So let's say people are stuck in a more state of disconnect and wanting connection. It doesn't have to be physical, it doesn't have to be intimate, but how do we start to nurture that sort of reconnection time as the season is shifting?
Well, I think it comes with reconnecting with yourself first. So as the season is shifting, getting your lifestyle in check, where you're doing the things that you need to support yourself so you feel very steady in your body and in your mind. Like, for example, I'm hugging a cup of tea right now, and this is my go-to. I guess it's all year round, but it's definitely more in the colder seasons. So having things in your life and incorporating them so that you feel good about your body, your mind, your emotions. So then your cup is full enough to give to the other. Because if you're going to come from a place where that's not a possibility because everything's being drained out of you and this pivoting is becoming a real challenge, it's going to be harder to understand those expectations that are coming from within instead of from the outside world. So planning ahead, I think when the season's about to change, okay, well, what's my checklist? Like, what are the foods that I'm going to change moving into the next season? What's the sleep hygiene that needs to shift for this coming season? How do I get my whole family on board so everybody is being served in this new routine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. And one of your superpowers though is really listening to your body.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that you're really good at. So it is like Sonya is really good at just honoring and having clear boundaries around what's okay for her, what's not, and like when she needs something, it's like she will honor that. So whereas I'm just using myself as an example. If my feet are cold, I don't always go and put the thicker socks on. I don't make myself a cup of tea necessarily. But if you're feeling cold, like you'll like take action right away, right? You'll get the tea, you'll get the really thick socks on, you'll do some stuff to I really appreciate that about you, because you're listening and then you're doing something about it. And I think that there's many little things like that might show up in people's lives where they're kind of like, oh, that's kind of annoying, I'm just going to kind of suffer through it, I'm just going to deal with it, or and when we all have an opportunity, like the same thing with food. I'm not feeling well because I ate a boatload of sugar or I ate too many sweets the night before, and I'm just going to do the same thing again because it's like actually filling this void, it's filling this emotional need that I have, or what have you. And really, like, maybe filling your cup in that moment is going, maybe it's just time for a little bit of tea. What am I actually feeling? I think it's an opportunity, I think that you do very well, is to reflect on what's going on, like what am I actually feeling, what do I need in this moment, as opposed to like, how do I just not deal with that thing.
Well, I think the bigger thing is in that is that we've lost trust in that voice. So we don't often listen to it. We push it aside because, since we were children, we're told what to do. We're told what our schedule is instead of listening to what's going on. And I still catch myself with the boys because they will sometimes tell me, I'm not hungry right now, but it's dinner time, right? But it's lunchtime. So now we got to do this. And so we're already training them to not listen to their cues, but to listen to the schedule that's been set out for them. And it's not an easy thing to shift out of, but I'm definitely recognizing that that happens often as parents, that we forget that they also they're more tuned in than we are. And we do need to have conversation around that. Not that, because, kids are kind of funny. They may say they're not hungry, but they actually are, because they're just so busy doing what they're doing. But just, taking a pause and recognizing that moment for what it is and seeing if it's actually them listening to their intuition, and are we shutting that off? So if forever we have been told this is how things are, we're not going to listen. But when we do start to listen, we build that trust back. So now we're trusting ourselves, we're trusting our intuition. So, putting the socks on, getting a cup of tea may sound really small, but it's actually really big, because you're going to change your relationship with who you think you are and how you should operate.
And how you nurture yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of brings this conversation full circle, because at the end of the day, like when we're appreciating the seasons of life, that's where we really need to anchor into our trust and the skills of listening.
Yeah. So I think it always goes back to connection. We've disconnected for a long time from ourselves, from nature, from all the things, and
Community.
the more community, the more we bring that back into our lives and understand the importance of it, the easier it gets. And then it just is. You don't even have to think about it.
Yeah. And when you're feeling triggered by someone, yourself, your significant other, try not to push away. Try not to be in that force of resistance, just like with the season. Like I'm a bigger fan of summer than I am winter typically, although I love a lot of outdoor winter activities. But if I had to choose one, I'd probably choose summer. And we can be in resistance to just that experience of the change, right? So, just like with the food, with your partner, with relationships, notice where you have a preference, but you don't have to live there, right? You can just recognize that there is a preference. You prefer joy and happiness, connection, all that stuff, but there's a lesson to be learned when we're not in the preference.
Because it's going to keep happening around you.
Yeah.
The winter will come. Winter is coming.
Sounds so ominous. I'm thinking
it's like Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
You can't stop it. So what do? Do we resist it, or do we move through it? Yeah.
So we don't have to sit in our preference. We can appreciate the preference.
Yeah.
Sit in our trust.
and not have expectations of another to validate.
I think we're talking about the shelves right now.
We kind of
We
are.
kind of are.
Yeah.
You can use the shelves as a metaphor for life.
You can.
You can just celebrate the victory and completion without
Mhm.
looking for validation outside yourself. Thank you for that teaching.
Simple yet profound.
Yeah. Okay. So you see it. Look behind us, guys. If you guys are seeing this on video, that's my amazing wife, the superhero right next to me. That's her book. It is available on December 7th, or it will be released to the public on December 7th.
But you can pre-order now on Amazon or womanunleashedbook.com.
And other news, we're in the middle of our Metabolic Fix program, which we run quarterly typically. And we also connect with our people on our Health Ignited membership.
Yeah, so going back to that, reconnecting and community is this community that we've created online has been amazing, especially in the times that we're in right now. So being a part of a community and supporting one another, I think, is the way forward. Yeah, so join us.
Take action, right? Okay, lots of love to all of you, and I love you.
You too.
Thank you for that teaching.
Even the shelves.
Yes. Take care, everyone.